In the Old West, justice wasn't a system. It was a brutal, split-second decision. There were no courts, no lawyers, no trials, just desperate people on the edge, ready to make their own rules. Life and death were settled by the quickest draw, the loudest shout, or the strongest arm. Whether you were guilty or just unlucky, if you crossed the wrong person, the consequences were swift, savage, and unforgettable. From a stolen horse to a harsh word, the punishment was often a rope, a bullet, or worse. Today, we're diving into the top 10 brutal punishments in the Old West. Punishments that came with no trial, no judge, and no mercy. Get ready to uncover the raw, unfiltered truth of how justice was served when the law couldn't keep up. This is Beyond the Old West, where the myths end and the real terror begins. Top 1. Vigilante Hanging. They didn't wait for the law to catch up. They didn't care about evidence or trial. They just tied a rope, found the nearest tree, and let the lawless crowd do the rest. A man named Caleb Harper was accused of horse theft. The sheriff was miles away. The judge was in another county. The people didn't have time for patience. The noose was ready before he could speak. They said he was guilty. They didn't need proof. The crowd dragged him to the town square, some cheering, some silent, and hoisted him up without ceremony. The executioner, a man with no title but a deep grudge, stood quietly with his hand on the rope. Then the boots kicked. And just like that, Caleb was gone. No trial. No defense. No questions asked. Afterward, they cut the body down and tossed it into the dirt. The townsfolk went back to their work like it was nothing more than a dusty event. No tears, no justice. Just swift retribution. It didn't matter if he was innocent. It didn't matter if he was the wrong man. All that mattered was that someone had to pay, and the town wasn't waiting. In the Old West, vigilante justice wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. And once it started, there was no stopping it. Top 2. Branding, the red iron in the Old West. A man's name wasn't just his identity. It was a mark. And if you were branded, that mark was there to stay. Branding wasn't about killing. It was about making sure you never forgot what you'd done, and neither would anyone else. A man named Jebediah Flint had been caught rustling cattle from a local rancher. It wasn't the first time, but it would be the last. He was dragged to the center of town, hands tied behind his back, and thrown to the dirt at the feet of a furious crowd. No judge, no jury, just a town ready to make an example of him. The sheriff held the hot iron. The red glow of the metal, still burning from the flames, cast long shadows across Jebediah's face. He didn't scream as they pressed the iron into his forehead. The skin sizzled, blackened, and bubbled with the heat. It wasn't enough to kill him, not yet. He was forced to stand there, holding his ground, while the brand cooled and set deep into his flesh. The scar would never fade. Every time someone saw him, they would know exactly who he was and what he'd done. Branding wasn't just physical pain. It was public humiliation, a sentence that would last for the rest of his life. The pain would heal, the flesh would scar, but the shame would be a constant companion. And as Jebediah stumbled away, no one dared to look him in the eye. Because in the Old West, the worst punishment wasn't death. It was being marked for life. Top 3. Tar and feather. It wasn't just a punishment. It was an exhibition. They didn't just want to make you suffer. They wanted the whole town to see it. Every eye, every whisper, everyone watching as you were stripped of your dignity and turned into a living reminder of the price of defiance. The process was brutal, but it wasn't quick. First, they stripped you down to your undergarments, tied your hands behind your back, and forced you to kneel in front of the crowd. They didn't care about your protests. They didn't care if you were innocent. They cared about sending a message. Next came the tar, hot, sticky, and thick. It was poured over your body, starting with your head and running down to your feet. It scalded your skin, leaving a searing burn that lasted long after the heat had faded. You screamed, but no one cared. Then, the feathers. They stuck to the tar, light and mocking, as if to add insult to injury. The townspeople would gather around, some laughing, some watching in silence, but all knowing that you were now branded. The feathered man. The goal wasn't to kill. It was to humiliate. It was to make you walk through the streets, covered in feathers, with the weight of every stare on your back. And even after it was over, the feathers would stick to your skin, like a constant reminder of what you'd done. You wouldn't just bear the marks of the tar, you'd bear the shame for the rest of your life. Top 4. Accidental. Justice wasn't always about courtrooms or gallows. Sometimes it was about making sure someone paid without anyone getting their hands dirty. One man named Nathaniel Briggs was accidentally shot during a routine robbery attempt. The story spread quickly. He'd tried to hold up a traveling merchant, and when he lunged for the man's rifle, the gun went off. A quick shot to the chest. That was the end of it. Except, no one seemed to ask the right questions. The merchant wasn't shaken. The sheriff didn't press charges. The bullet, as if by accident, had found its mark. But no one checked if Nathaniel had been set up. No one questioned the timing. The way the merchant accidentally knew where Nathaniel was hiding. By nightfall, the town had moved on. No one saw the body taken away. No one cared when the grave was dug. No one wondered if the merchant had been part of the story at all. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a quiet way of saying, don't ask too many questions. And for those who lived in towns like these, that was the only lesson they needed. Top 5. Buried to the neck, no rope, no whip, just dirt. It didn't matter if you were guilty. It didn't matter if you begged. The law was simple. If you were caught, you didn't get a second chance. You were taken out to a field, buried, and left to face the world that would end you without lifting a finger. They buried you to the neck, leaving only your head exposed, eyes wide and frantic. The dirt would press in, the earth closing around you, suffocating you bit by bit. You could still breathe, but not for long. The fear started there. That first few seconds where you realized you were alone, you were completely helpless. The heat would burn your skin. The cold would freeze your limbs. You'd hear the sounds of the world moving around you, but you were trapped in that pit, unable to escape. The only thing you could feel was the ground against your body, slowly, relentlessly, pulling you into its grip. Sometimes the townsfolk would leave you like that for hours, sometimes for days. They didn't need to watch. They didn't need to kill you with a bullet or a rope. The earth did its work, and when the soil finally filled your mouth, you knew it wasn't death that killed you. It was time. Top 6. Public whipping. There was no room for dignity, no room for mercy, only the sharp snap of the whip and the sting of shame. A public whipping wasn't just about pain, it was about submission. It was about showing the town that there was no place for disobedience. You were nothing more than an example, a warning to others who might think of crossing the line. One man, a gambler in Dodge City, was accused of cheating in a poker game. They didn't arrest him. They didn't wait for a trial. The sheriff just ordered him to stand in the middle of the square, hands bound, and made him wait as the crowd gathered. Then came the whip. First the crack of it in the air, then the sting as it cut through the air and landed against his skin. The crowd stayed silent, watching as his body jerked with each strike. His back bled. The blood ran down, mixing with sweat, and he gasped for breath. But he didn't couldn't scream. He couldn't. The lashes kept coming, 40 in total, each one harder than the last. The pain was unbearable. But the worst part was the eyes of the crowd. The stares that didn't blink, the whispers that didn't stop, the faces of the townsfolk who came out to see justice. After the whipping, the man was left standing, broken, bleeding, but alive. He never spoke a word again, and no one who watched him that day ever forgot his name. 7. Ride on a rail. You didn't just suffer, you were paraded, a living spectacle for everyone to witness. The ride began with a rough wooden rail, splintered and jagged. You were lifted, hoisted onto it, and made to straddle it, naked to your shame. Arms tied, wrists bound. The town didn't just watch, they waited for it. There was no mercy, no quickness. They wanted to see every moment of agony, every shift of discomfort as you tried to balance yourself, tried to hold on to your dignity, but knew you were losing it by the second. The rail was sharp, splintering into your flesh with every movement. You felt it in every bone, every muscle, every jolt sent pain coursing through you. If you tried to scream, you just gasped for air, and they didn't care if you did. The walk through town wasn't quick. It was slow, deliberate, drawn out to make sure every single person had a chance to see you at your lowest. Every step was another reminder of your sin, another moment where you wished for death over the humiliation of living. The pain would fade, the marks would heal, but the memory of that ride, it would stick with you. It would follow you until the day you died. Exposure to the elements. Sometimes, all it took to die was to be left outside, tied to a tree, strapped to a post, or left alone in a barren wasteland. They didn't need a noose, a gun, or a beating. Nature did the work. One man named Jacob Carter was accused of betraying his friends during a gold rush. He didn't even have the chance to explain. They dragged him to the edge of town, tied him to a pole, and left him there. The sun beat down on him relentlessly. His lips cracked, his throat burned. Sweat poured from his skin, but it wasn't enough to stop the parching dryness that gripped his insides. He had no food, no water, no shade. Only the steady march of time and the scorching heat, the dust in the air, the wind like a slow knife cutting through him. By the second day, his mind began to wander. He begged for mercy. No one came. By the third day, his tongue swelled. His body weakened. He collapsed under the weight of his own thirst, but the rope kept him in place. By the time they returned, his eyes were clouded. His body was barely a shell of what it had been. They cut him free, but it didn't matter. Nature had already stripped him of everything. And when they dragged his body back into town, there were no words left to speak. Only the dust that remained. In the Old West, justice wasn't something handed out by the courts. It was something taken by the people, quick, brutal, and often with no second thought. There were no judges, no lawyers, no rules, really. Just survival, plain and simple. It didn't matter whether you were guilty or innocent. What mattered was whether you were strong enough, fast enough, or had the luck to escape when the crowd turned on you. The punishments weren't designed to teach a lesson. They were meant to send a message. Cross the line and you'll be made an example of. Publicly, permanently. And while some survived, they often walked away with scars that never healed, physically and emotionally. The worst part? No one cared. If you were guilty, the crowd would decide your fate. And if you were innocent, well, that didn't matter either. What's worse, these weren't isolated events. They were regular occurrences in towns where the law was a distant idea. And the only justice was the one served by fists, fire, and fury. In this world, survival itself was the only real justice. This is Beyond the Old West, where we drag the ugly truths out of the past and let them speak. And in this world, the myths we've all heard, they don't compare to the brutal reality that those who lived it experienced. If you're still here, you've taken a glimpse into the shadows of the frontier. But the darkest stories are yet to come. Follow, subscribe, stay close, because this history isn't finished, and neither are we.